Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Snarp Fangle Podcast, episode 63. I am your host, Jake Metzger, a simple man who likes to pay less taxes, and my co-host, who gets my tax money by being funded by USAID. You're welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, David Reed. How you doing, David?
Oh, just living the dream on that USAID money.
Yeah, you're set.
Well, I was until
Did you spend it all?
Elon Musk came in and
Cleaned you out.
Cleaned you out.
Yep.
Man. Dang, Elon. But so now you're exploring different options, you know.
Oh yeah.
Seeing what Nicaragua has to say about funding David and all that.
Yeah, I think I might. There's obviously some kind of money in going to El Salvador and drinking margaritas with that Salvadorian dude that got deported.
Yeah, that guy. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I'll figure out. I think I might try that. See what sort of money train these Democratic congressmen have got going over there.
Yeah, they got it made good from what I can hear. So
follow the money.
Follow the money. And our guest this week is one of those fellows who has hair like a silver lion, and as well as allegedly, people say this, that he has a face, in quotes, a face for radio. Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Metzger.
That's what I said last time.
Yeah, how you doing, Dad?
I have a face for radio.
Face for radio.
I'm doing good.
Nice. Good to have you here. Thank you again for being here. And
yeah, it's been a while.
It is. The last time you were on was on an episode, called Face for Radio with Sarah and David. And I thoroughly enjoyed that podcast. It was very fun to hear you guys banter.
It was fun.
Yeah, it was good stuff. So
hey, if you're not having fun, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, that's what you've told me all my life, basically. All right, so for comments, concerns, hate mail, and general thoughts, and why you think you would subscribe to Mike Pompeo's OnlyFans, send those inquiries on over to snarpfanglepod@gmail.com, and his bald head too. So anyway, as we get into this, you weren't ready for that one, are you, David?
I don't even want to imagine.
He doesn't have one. He just has lost weight, I guess.
Yes, I know.
So,
I figured that he would not. Seems like.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, what were you hearing me?
Mike Pompeo?
Yeah, Mike Pompeo. I was Googling around. I couldn't tell you right at this moment what he was in charge of. I'm sure David will enlighten us. But apparently, yeah, he's lost weight recently and he's a little toned. And so that gave me the idea to say, well, he maybe has an OnlyFans,
But not beyond recognition, right?
Oh, yeah. You can still see his slimy face through all that lost weight. Oh, yeah. Still. Okay. So anyway, moving on. Welcome, gentlemen, to yet another episode where we get down and talk about things. And thank you, Dad, again for being on, taking your time out of your day. This
see what happens.
Beautiful afternoon in Northern California, which we are in California, by the way. And before we get into it, I do want to give a little preface for the audience. If you've looked at the thumbnail, if you looked at the title and the description even, yes, we're going to be talking about some politics around here. So just to give you a heads up, if you're not interested in that and you don't like it, you don't got to listen. You can turn us off, or maybe if you want to listen, feel free to. But where you don't usually dive into as deep we do today as we're going to today. So I just wanted to give that little preface for the audience there. But anyway, let's get into it. So,
you know what? One thing, I cannot wait to see what the algorithm does with this.
Yeah.
Because I remember it was one of the episodes we did with Thad.
Thad. Yeah.
The algorithm, somehow got a hold of one of the clips from there.
Yeah, the highlights, yep.
And we had all these people who would normally not be interested in hearing what we have to say, commenting and viewing. And there were some pretty interesting replies. So I'm very curious if the algorithm will pick up anything from here and carry us into the the views of our ideological opponents, so to speak.
or our allies that just don't like us. You never know.
Is that called uncharted territory?
Perhaps.
Yes. Well, so far, but we will probably get there. But yeah, the clip you're talking about, David, it's funny. It's the Snarp Fangle highlight called "Frogs Are Drunk on Christian Fundamentalism" is the title of the highlight.
Oh yes, that's what it was.
And the thumbnail is a picture of the article, or at least the closest type article I could find that we were talking about, and the face of Kermit smirking, overlaying that website page. And for some reason, just we had a bunch of people get into that comment section and say, "Oh, you guys know what the article's talking about. You guys take it out of context," and all this other kind of stuff. So it was very fun to watch from afar.
Stirring it up.
Yeah, they're stirring it up. Most disliked video on the channel so far. It was hilarious. But Dad, the reason why we have you on here is we're going to get into politics. And I'm aware that you've kind of taken a step back in recent years from politics and following it with a close eye. But I do want to get your insight on some modern stuff, as well as your history and your take on some things going on today. Are you ready?
Well, we could start with the step back because I've kind of sensed an increase of attention over the years in politics. It's kind of always been a blood sport, and it's taken on different modes throughout the U.S. history. But it seemed like in the last 10 years that it's been more contentious. And then you can see it in different forms. But I guess I never really dealt with low-level stress and anxiety. But so kind of going through a little reformation in my life as far as how to deal with that. And I just had to step back from politics for a while and say, you guys do whatever you want to do out there. I'm just going to chill and not be influenced by, other people's opinions and the strife that goes along with it. So I tried to step back for about 3 years, and it helped.
Yeah. So 3 years. So when did you start the step back?
Well, we had the election coming up a year ago, and people gearing up and talking about everything that's happened for the 3 years prior to that. And so I thought, get up to speed a little bit, find out what's been happening while I alienated myself from society in a certain way. So
Isolated, probably more like it,
Isolated, yeah.
Yeah, I guess both works, but
I don't want to be alienated, I guess. Nobody wants to.
Nobody wants that. So, okay, so you started 3 years ago from this year, basically?
No, I got back into it about a year ago, just because of the election coming up. And of course, everybody talks about what's been happening with, the people in charge over the last, 3 years, 3.5 years prior to that point.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I remember you and me were talking about this earlier the other week. I think I remember you were saying you were taking a break. I think about 2020-ish around there, and then you got caught up later on last year. It seems sometime. So yeah, nice. So yeah, I was for me, I try to follow some different people on Twitter, different people on YouTube, and. There was a point when I was a young adult where basically I was like watching the Ben Shapiro show every day. And that would be like an hour show I just would watch and to get my news for politics stuff, especially during Trump's first term, which I got into politics about 2017, early 2017. And we can go, I actually want to go into it a little bit later, but yeah, that's where my start was. So it's been a little under 10 years just diving into it. But at some point I had to take a break because I couldn't, it was a lot. getting inundated with that stuff every day, like willingly.
Right.
And then, of course, it's around you all the time, or depends on who you hang out with, or your friends or family or coworkers or whatever. People usually want to escape from that kind of thing. So I needed to escape from that. And so I took a break from all politics stuff for a little bit and just dived into like leisure stuff. And then eventually it called me back. Some big thing would happen and I would check in and see what's going on.
Well, there's just like this increasing spirit of contention, I guess it is. Even when you would listen to somebody that's really politically savvy, and they get caught up in, on both sides, and they want to persuade you that this is something really passionate they're about, and it's important, and they're trying to communicate what they believe. But when you're caught up in such high contention, I think you lose some of the effect that you have. Anger is not a good motivation to be for something or be against anything. And it's something that should be good that you're for, and not just because you're angry that somebody's doing something you don't like. And that shouldn't be a motivation.
I guess I've always been a contentious a-hole. I never really had that problem, I guess.
That's why I like you.
I wasn't always political. I think I tried to remain pretty much apolitical, despite having, more or less conservative values from the get-go. I always tried to remain more or less apolitical because it seemed like it was all a game to me. It seemed like, but then, around 2016, when I started taking note of it, the Trump starting to run for president. At first it was just like, oh God, the you're fired guy is going to run for president, huh? How much worse can things get? How much more stupid can politics get? I'm glad I don't pay attention to that stuff. And then I started seeing the reaction of everyone else to him running, and it was like, wow, he's like exposing a lot of things that I hadn't really seen before. So at that point I was like, I need to start paying attention to this stuff, because it's started pointing to some things in society that I hadn't really paid attention to that have become have turned out to be kind of important in recent years,
like important from the fact that it has an impact on other people's lives.
Yes. Like things that shape how we do things in this country, how we see other people, and it's like our morals and stuff,
Right.
And so at that point I was just like, I need to start paying attention to this stuff. And so the fact that the contention sort of ratcheted up at that point never really bothered me, because I was like, I've always been contentious.
Good for you.
I enjoy. I guess I'm unique in that regard. I enjoy inflicting misery upon other people with my opinions, and people trying to do the same to me. Like I welcome it. It's like, come on, bring it on.
Enjoy the fight,
Yeah. So
Right.
I've always been like that. So.
Right. Well, I've been around for a few years, and it's funny because you watch people like in the 60s that disagreed, but it wasn't to the point they couldn't go and have a beer later on. Not that that's something I would do, but I mean, you could still talk to them and just say, okay, I understand where you're coming from. I definitely don't agree, but it doesn't mean I'm going to cast you from society or something like that.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is a lot of the contention I think is not as widespread as people want to say it is, because the thing about the internet is the loudest voices are not always the majority.
Right.
And so you have a lot of things in the internet, in media in general, where you have all these like, oh, I'm casting you from my life because you disagree with me politically. But I don't think that's as widespread as people necessarily might believe it is. Because what's interesting is, despite being a contentious a-hole, I've never...
Tell us more, David.
I've never broken up a friendship or anything like that over politics.
Right.
And I mean, I'm pretty darn opinionated, and I always have been. And so you might expect that it'd be harder for me to hold a conversation with somebody who's pretty like diametrically opposed to me ideologically. But what I found is it's not that hard. And as long as they're willing to still have the conversation, I'm still willing to have the conversation.
Yeah.
And for the most part, when I'm in direct contact with people, they're willing to have the conversation. I've the only people I see like wanting to cut someone off completely over their politics is mostly been like in the realm of, you know, the crazy people who are really loud on the internet.
Yeah.
So I think while the contention certainly has ratcheted up in the political sphere, I don't think it's necessarily as bad as people make it out to be. I think part of that is we're so much more saturated by media nowadays. We kind of sometimes, I think, lose the ability to distinguish between that and reality.
Right.
But I think the reality is people are still willing to go and have a beer afterwards if they have a political disagreement. It's just, I think media and the internet are trying to convince us that they're not.
Right. Definitely the loudest gets the most attention. And they're capturing all the media attention. So that's unfortunate, but I do see a difference, but I don't know if it's just what people are focusing on from a media standpoint. But, we don't have a balance of political opinion necessarily in our area. So we're not really confronted with everyday aspects of that.
Yeah, part of it too is like you go to places where people are more tightly packed, bigger cities, more populated areas, you're more likely to get more strife there. And I think that's always been the case. Now people are starting to pay more attention to it. Because I think people where highly populated areas have always been contentious places filled with strife, I think. And I think what's happened now is that's taken on more of a political element, but it hasn't necessarily, but the behavior hasn't necessarily changed. It's just now over politics instead of, somebody cut me off in traffic,
Right.
Yeah, and that's something that we talked a lot about on this podcast, actually, especially the opening several episodes, was to disconnect yourself from the internet and just the noise, in quotes, out there, because there's so much of it that it makes your attention gets carried away and you lose track of what's important, especially what's in real life.
Right.
And it's just really important to, you should stay informed to a certain extent, but don't let it become, well, kind of like what we talk about church today, don't let it become an idol in your life, because it can easily be that like, oh, well, I'm going to devote this time specifically every day, which there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but don't let it be the most important thing in your life, and don't be responding to people online the most important thing in your life. There's greater things that are far more important than that. So, but it does remind me of one thing. I was watching a video this week about the Nintendo Switch 2, which is coming out next month. And as every little pockets of the internet, there's always fandoms that are kind of crazy and kind of mean and kind of out of control. And sometimes Nintendo fans, as people would say, are quite contentious in themselves and always hate Nintendo, but they just like in Sopranos and Godfather, it's like they got me and they brought me back in or something, whatever the quote is. But because of nostalgia and all this stuff, and Nintendo's been around a long time. But anyway, this guy called JDX Coffee I follow on YouTube, and he does these like conversational videos where he makes coffee and just talks about games basically. But he had an experience when he went to GameStop to go pre-order the new Switch. And he went into detail about what it was like and how cool the people were there, and he was nervous because he didn't know if he was going to get one or not. But the main thing he brought up, which really stood out to me, was he said, "Man, you see all this like hate and like contention online, and it's all over the place. It's everywhere. But man, when I went to go pre-order that, we were all excited. There were super cool people that were like, hey, no, don't cut in line. Like this guy had it, was here first, And even like when they opened the doors to the store in the afternoon and they let everybody in, they were super chill, super kind. Everybody was like, there for excited for the new thing. And yeah, they might not get one because of limited quantity, but it was a camaraderie thing and kind of called back to like the days of midnight releases and kind of gaming events that got people really excited. And that really stood out to me. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And it was cool because he then dived into and just said, you don't really see that online because like he brought it up in the video, the loudest voices will get the most attention. And usually it's
the haters.
The haters. What was I going to say? It was the haters and those who are driven by anger. Yeah. So, and it goes into anything, gaming, politics, toxicity in general. But yeah, that's just, it made me think. I'm like, it's not real. Because what you see online isn't always real life, basically. So,
right. So I think looking at politics, a lot of it is looking past what people are saying or how they're saying it and try to figure out, and just from experience, you can figure out what people's motivation are. Because, a government position, even if you're elected or you're hired to be a bureaucrat or something, it's really a servant position.
Yeah.
And it's not like necessarily a high and lifted, exalted position.
Not nowadays. No.
It's not supposed to be.
No.
But that's what it's really designed to do is listen to what people want and then provide that to them the best way you know how. But if you listen to somebody long enough, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth will speak.
That's right.
They usually eventually reveal what their motivation is. And you can kind of you have to read between the lines most of the time. And to figure out what's this guy's coming from. And he's saying one thing. But if I follow somebody long enough, I can say, okay, I know what this guy's attitude is, where he usually ends up actually doing in his position. Then you have to just get past the lies. And because now politics is more about lying to get what you or the position you want, and then you could do whatever you want after everybody leaves the room and you're actually making the decisions that affect other people's lives.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's unfortunate. The unfortunate development of politics has been the trend of promising people one thing to get the votes and then doing the complete opposite thing. I remember back in when Obama was first running for president, I remember him campaigning specifically on bringing our troops back home because, Bush too.
Bush 2, the sequel.
Yeah, Bush 2
I've heard that before.
kicked off the
Just get me.
kicked off the war in the Middle East, and it kind of turned into a forever war. And Obama was campaigning. I think he was running against McCain the first time around.
Yep, McCain. Yeah.
And yeah, so he was like trying to make himself appear. He was basically trying to get votes. He was like, yeah, this war in the Middle East business, we got to get our troops out of there. It's none of our business. We're not the world police kind of thing. Because, people we're starting to get a little tired of it at that point.
Right.
But then he gets elected, and what does he do? The complete and opposite. And he does not pull us out of any Middle Eastern conflicts. In fact, he ramps up even more Middle East conflicts by his actions. There's a reason why one of his nicknames was Drone Striker in Chief. Like, the amount of drone strikes that he authorized was a shocking number for someone who ran on being like anti-war and pro-peace. So it's like, it's one of those things. It's like, I think it's been done for a long time, because people never really looked too deeply before into who they were voting for, or at least they didn't to the degree that they do now. I think there was a lot more trust in media, and a lot more like, oh, he says this, so he must want to make good on it, So I think that's the sort of thing was always happening, but there was a lot of layers in place where people were just not quite recognizing it, and that was a big moment for me when I saw that, because I was like, when he was campaigning, I was like, oh, this Obama guy seems pretty cool, It's like, yeah, wants to pull our troops out of the Middle East. I'm all for that. Wants to turn things around and, move us forward. And I was still apolitical at this point, so I wasn't necessarily sold on Obama, but
you weren't biased.
I wasn't really sold on Obama, but he seemed like a pretty cool guy, as like, yeah, I could get behind that. I hope he does that. If he gets in. And then he got in, and he didn't do that. He didn't do any of that. In fact, Obama could be more closely compared to George Bush than he could be to any other president. He was basically like Bush 3, but black. And he campaigned on literally the opposite of that. He's like, yeah, I see all this stuff that people are angry about, that the Bush era policies that people don't like, the wars, the bailing out these big corporations and all that. What does he do? Wars and bailing out big corporations.
Yep.
Yeah, I kind of see 3 categories that society looks at electing a leader. You got foreign, and then you got economic, and then you got social. And I think, at least for Obama, he was more concerned about the social, but he would say whatever he had to say about the other 2 things to get elected and find favor with the majority of the people. But that's the hard thing, is seeing through what people are really trying to accomplish. And if they have a track record, it's pretty easy to, especially now, looking up stuff, finding out what people have done with the authority that they've been given. So,
yeah, and that's something I remember specifically about Obama, just growing up, because I wasn't really politically aware. I just would see what's on the news or what you would listen to down on the radio, and it was funny. While David was talking, I was thinking about how growing up, when there was like a new Supreme Justice going to be nominated, or when there's something they were criticizing this about Romney or whatever. And you told me, well, the reason why they're not criticizing Romney is because we're watching MSNBC and they don't like Republicans, that kind of thing. So they're probably not going to have a very light view of Romney. And then you said, oh, well, Obama will probably put in a justice that is very much of his opinion and is of his side of the aisle and that kind of thing. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, it's okay. Well, whatever. Yeah, I wasn't really paying super attention to it. But then like nowadays, like in the 2020s, I remember experiencing some of that and seeing all the advice you gave me or the pointers you put out. And I remember, I knew about this stuff 20 years ago. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Like somebody would put in a justice like this, or the news would say this about people, especially when Trump got elected. There was, on all fronts, it seemed like everybody was after him specifically after he got elected. And I remember waking up that night and I'm like, oh, I wonder if he won. And he won. Or I wonder if he lost is what I was assuming. I checked my phone and it says he won. I'm like, no way. Huh, interesting. And then I went back to bed. Like I went to sleep. Like, I'm going to continue on with my life. So it's an interesting, I was actually going to ask you about this later on, but I guess I'll ask you now. How did focusing on politics for you affect your view of raising a family growing up? Because that's something I've always been curious about you. Becoming politically aware at an earlier, point in your life, and then carrying that on, and then learning and growing and maturing, and that kind of stuff.
Well, I think starting to focus on politics gained a greater importance because I was just starting a family. So Jimmy Carter was 1979 was running for president against Ford, and I had no idea what, you hear a little bit there, but never paid attention. It's not like we talked about politics in the family when I was growing up. But so I was at work and they said, oh, well, a conservative believes this, a liberal believes that. And you look at the extremes of those if you want. But, the basic tenor of those two groups is X. And so I said, well, being a conservative aligns more with what I believe, economically, socially, and I didn't really care about foreign entanglements at that time. So I said, well, I'm conservative, but I voted for Jimmy Carter, which he is not really a liberal at all. He had the soft side where, he kind of backed off on things he probably should have charged forward on, but that's all water under the bridge. But I heard that he was a Christian, and I thought, well, that counts for more than maybe things I hear that I don't agree with, that he believes. And definitely the Democratic Party, I saw a lot of things that kind of troubled me. So, and then, I think getting back to motivation, the intent of what they're actually trying to accomplish. But it seemed like as long as I was looking at it, and even I remember, the first president I remember being elected was John Kennedy in 1960. And I thought, because everybody's all riled up about the election and Nixon running against Kennedy and seeing that go down. But, I was only 5 at the time. And I thought, oh, okay. And then when he got shot, I showed up at school one day and they said, did you hear the president get shot? I said, why would somebody shoot a president? Strongly held beliefs there, but I didn't understand for a long time.
Yeah.
I was in the second grade. And so Anyway, getting back to kind of, okay, I believe that I'm more on the conservative side, and then start taking a look at politics in depth to make sure that the group that you're supporting is actually somebody that is, the group really aligns with everything that you believe. And taking a look at the Bible, this will probably make a lot of people mad. I saw that.
Bringing contention to the discussion, huh?
Well, yeah, let's just liven it up a little bit.
Yeah. We're covering politics. Let's get into religious theology. Let's do it.
And politics at the same time. Is that it really agreed, I saw, with the conservative values more than the liberal values. Socially and economically. Although being generous is good to help people out, and I'm really all for that. It's just not the government's position to give my money to somebody else I disagree with.
Yeah.
That's really troublesome. So when you get into liberal from an economic standpoint, and you say, well, it's the right thing to do. And I think there's a role for government. I'm not
You're not a libertarian?
not a libertarian, which is kind of a funny name for what they believe. But it needs to be done from a private sector standpoint, being generous and giving and providing the needs of the people. But, obviously the government has a role, but it's gotten a little out of hand, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's gotten more than a little out of hand. That's the one thing that's I constantly run into in discourse. It seems like people seem to have this idea that because the Bible commands generosity and kindness towards others, that, then you're a hypocrite if you vote conservative, because conservatives are all about being stingy and mean to people. And it's like, that's such a surface level analysis of everything, but of biblical morality in particular. Is like, just because we're commanded to be kind and generous doesn't mean we have to vote for people who are going to promise that the government's going to be kind and generous and then turn around and embezzle our money,
Mm-hmm.
Well, the same Bible that says, give and be generous and give hilariously also says don't steal. So if you're stealing from somebody, so to speak, because they don't agree with it, to give to somebody else, it's taking two values and that are opposition to each other and trying to make it a good thing.
Yeah, robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak.
Right. Never heard that before.
You never heard that phrase before?
No, I'm teasing.
Okay.
I have.
Okay.
I'm being sarcastic.
See, I couldn't tell.
It's hard to tell
You
by
have such a consistent delivery sometimes.
It's true. It's a weakness of mine.
I don't know if that's a weakness. I don't know.
I definitely have it for sure later on, so. But I find that interesting, David. Like you constantly see Christianity or those who are Christian be criticized because of that thing. But again, it is such a surface level analysis. There's so much more nuance to pretty much everything in life. And it's funny how people will not look into nuance at certain things like that. It makes me always wonder of the case of, well, this, because you're labeled Republican or Democrat or independent or libertarian, whatever, you have to believe these things. You believe those things, right? But it kind of like a watershed moment for me was during, I think, 2020, during that election cycle, where I was like, no, life is way more nuanced than anything. And to see, to see the kind of turmoil in that year specifically really stood out to me as a time of reevaluating what you believe. A lot of people leaving faith as well as leaving political fields, theologies, ideologies, all the above, and kind of shifting our perspective from what politics were in 2012 to where they were in 2020 to where they are today. But whenever somebody assumes something like that, I can always tell that, well, maybe you should look up a little deeper than that. You should dig a little deeper, per se. So
I like the word shallow.
Shallow.
Kind of describes the approach that people are taking. But that's one thing I've noticed increasingly over the years. If they can isolate people into groups and put a title on that, they can try to distort the conversation or end the conversation. Okay, I'm right. You're in this group. The discussion's over.
Yeah.
And that's part of the contentiousness that has been kind of ugly. Yeah. It's okay. We're done talking because you're one of those.
Yeah, you're one of those. I kind of want to go back to that thing of looking at it with more nuance, I guess you could say, because I remember in 2020 following different creators, and that was also the year where I realized, oh, not everything on the internet you see and read is true. Like I would get recommended things on YouTube and watch them from different creators, subscribe, and then after a little while, you kind of goes back to what we were talking earlier. You kind of see the veil come off of them, or with enough time, or you listen to somebody for a certain amount of time, you will see their true self, and from abundance, the heart and the mouth will speak. And I remember seeing that a lot. And yeah, not to get political, but totally getting political here. But I remember when the whole thing with in the last couple of years with Candace Owens leaving the Daily Wire and her spat with Ben Shapiro specifically, I remember seeing that. I was kind of like distraught a little bit because I followed Ben for years, but then I saw his behavior and I was like, I really don't like that at all. And, Candace ain't perfect either, but it's interesting to see the reach that both of these people have, the fan bases as well. But to see that kind of pull back made me reevaluate things. Mm-hmm. And again, no, they're both not perfect people, and I don't really follow Ben anymore or don't watch much of Candace either, but I do go every once in a while and see what they're doing. But I kind of lost respect for both of them in a way, seeing that, and especially Ben. I was like really put off by that. I'm like, this is kind of weird, but whatever. I guess I'll go watch Timcast or something, something I was subscribed to. Right. But that kind of shift made me realize, again, the nuance of things. The infighting on the right and the left at times, as well as how do you determine that and how does it affect you in your worldview? We want to bring it back to the Bible, but sometimes it's hard to pull exactly the choice you should make politically from the Bible. Sometimes we have our core truths, but how do you translate that to real life sometimes, I guess? Right. Especially dealing with politics.
Well, I brought up the part about lying, and it's good. Well, it's not good. It's actually terrible to see how effective people are in lying. And there's a Marxist technique where if you say a lie long enough and you add some attitude and passion to it and you say it enough, people will eventually believe it. And I think that's where people that realize they're really on the wrong side of an issue, but because they're there, they have to continue on the same track. There's a lot of pride that goes into politics because people have a hard time admitting that they're wrong, and so you get the fact that that they can't do anything but lie at that point. And I think that's probably the the biggest attribute I see with Trump is that he's pretty much an open book. Whether you disagree or agree with any and everything he says, it's pretty transparent. He's not really trying to, say I'm over here, and then when I get to be president, I'm going to do this. It's pretty consistent.
Yeah. And the thing too is like he's not always right about things, but like
Right.
when he says something, even if it's wrong, you don't have to think like, oh, he's trying to like push this idea. He's saying what he thinks, and what he thinks might be wrong or misinformed or whatever on any given topic, but he's saying what he thinks, you
Right.
know? And I think, yeah, it was kind of, I mean, it was a long time in coming. I think there was a lot of dissatisfaction with growing in the political sphere among just normal, everyday, working class kind of people. And people were just getting tired of the games, And you had some glimmers where, it kind of almost broke out into a wider movement. You had the Tea Party, you had the Ron Paul running for president, but those sort of movements kind of were over before they even started almost.
Right.
And so finally when Trump got on the scene, it was like people were like, enough is enough. Like, we're tired of all the lies. Here's a guy who actually is being transparent and open. Let's go. Even if we
Right.
don't necessarily agree with everything
Mhm.
he wants to implement, it's a breath of fresh air. And that's one of those things that's really kind of like, it's not even about who Trump is necessarily. It's not about Trump as whether he is the ideal leader or that he embodies the, conservative ethos or not. It's more like he's a rare thing in a politician, and that's almost non-existent, in fact, is that somebody who's willing to engage honestly with people and not try and lie their way into office.
Right. Yeah, we going through McCain and Romney running for president, and you really didn't see much hope in what I would consider more moderate Republicans, because a moderate to me is almost like I can't make a decision, so I'll be halfway in between, and not for everybody, but that's kind of the way it seems.
Yeah, and it's really funny too. It's like the idea of moderates in American politics is like, it's sort of when people say they're a moderate, they try to like, oh, it's a good thing because I'm unbiased, But
I'm
it's
an
like
independent.
most of American political ideas fit within a pretty narrow sort of range of the political spectrum as a whole. Because we talk about conservatives versus liberals, left versus right, all the time in the context of American politics. But it's like American politics fits neatly, aside from a few outliers, fits pretty much neatly into what might be called liberalism or classical liberalism. And so conservatives and liberals in the American sense are really two closely related flavors of liberals in terms of like politics in a wider sense. But people like zoom in on that as if Democrats are over here and Republicans are over here. And then people start talking about far left and far right. Not that there isn't far left and far right elements in American politics, but by and large, they're on the fringes.
Mm-hmm.
Like people talk about like Obama as far left, and it's like Obama was about as far from the far left as you can get. But because we're so zoomed in, we think of these two very closely related things as opposite ends of the extreme. And so people try to straddle the line between that as if they're like straddle a line between two things that are more or less the same anyway. I mean, we're talking about like differences between definitions of words and stuff like that. That,
Right.
you know, ideas that are closely related in principle, but differ more in execution. And
Right.
somebody trying to straddle the line between those two things is not what I would call a very principled position.
Right. When I'm having a discussion with somebody about anything, it's and you can see you're not getting anywhere. There's two things that are going on there. One is defining words. Somebody's using a word, okay, that means something to me, and I have no idea what it means to the other person. But and unless I actually say, hey, what do you mean by what you just said? And politics is really bad in this sense that they'll use a word that everybody knows, but when they say it, they have their whole ideology behind it.
Mm-hmm.
As a, the word is just a cover for what they actually believe. And when they say it in the light of their life worldview. And then when I say it in the context of my view. So it's so often people will use buzzwords or common words to show that they're for people, but unless you know what's behind the scenes, it doesn't really. It's not a fruitful discussion. When somebody's monologuing and giving a speech, a lot of times it might sound good, but if you know what they stand for, it's totally meaningless, and it's very frustrating.
Yeah, that's something that I've taken quite a considerable amount of attention to the last couple of years, especially. Like, I remember liking for example, like Dan Crenshaw. I remember I was listening to him on podcasts and him being interviewed, and I'm like, oh, this guy's kind of cool. He's a veteran, But then, like, you see the war in Ukraine and him voting for it, and a bunch of other people did too. But you see what he actually stands up for in being a kind of a McCain type of starting war and continuing war, at least I should say. And that kind of brought more nuance to him. But I want to go back to your thing, Dad, you just said, viewpoint and the context and your worldview. And to kind of, basically, when did it change for you is what I want to get to. Like, when did Bob get red-pilled? Was it after he voted for Carter? Was it the first time he voted for Reagan? Did you vote for Reagan? Like,
the second time he ran, yeah. Definitely.
Okay.
Because I actually started a business the same year that Reagan got elected. I started in early 1980, and he got elected in the fall of 1980. And he was such a plain speaker in especially on economics and the social scene, that it was pretty clear. He wasn't really, he didn't have a backdoor agenda. He was actually pretty much a straight shooter, and he was doing what he said he was going to do. And that's pretty much the same parallel I see between Reagan and Trump is they pretty much they do what they say.
Yeah. And that's the interesting thing too, is Reagan is another one of those that stands so apart from the normal political types. It's like you can it's the kind of person you want to see in office, even if you don't necessarily agree with everything they're doing. I remember really, I remember, I think I watched like a YouTube video on like the history of the drinking age or something, and then Reagan's part in getting every single state to bump the drinking age to 21 was really, really interesting, because he essentially levied the power of the federal government to get the states to fall in line with his agenda. And then you hear him talk about it, what he wants to do. And like, you hear him actually talk about why he's doing that and what he wants to accomplish with that. And he's like, yeah, I know I'm the guy who told you the scariest phrase you'll ever hear is I'm from the government and I'm here to help you.
Yes.
He's like, I know I said that, but in this case, I really believe that raising the drinking age will stop, will lessen auto fatalities that are alcohol related. And I believe in this so much that I'm willing to leverage government power to do it, even though I would normally be against that sort of thing. And it's like, that's like such a bizarre thing to hear from a politician, like to actually lay out their thought process on why they want to do this thing and what they hope to accomplish with it.
Right.
Most of the time they just sell you some buzzword filled feel good vision of the future, and you don't even really know why they want to accomplish that or what they're going to do to, implement it,
Right. If it's the right person and you see they have the right motives, most people will say, I have a responsibility to elect a person or vote for a person that's going to do the best for this country. Not just me. I have a business and I like to see stuff done that encourages business and free trade and all that. But even if somebody wasn't along that thought line and so the right person came along and you can see through all the garbage, the layers, and you can see they have a good motivation and they've really thought it out clearly. Most people get behind that person.
And I think that's the thing I've noticed looking back at some of the Reagan stuff this week has been, especially comparing him to Trump, is you kind of get a really dang good idea of where their heart lies. And I think back to the first debates in 2015 with the Republican debate with Trump in it, and which is really fun to go back and listen to, by the way, just to see him tear apart all these like establishment folks and the
primary.
The primary, yes, sorry, yeah. The primary. And just to see him tear apart all these Republicans, and it's really funny just to watch, and he makes it entertaining, and he knows he can do that. But two people I think come out of that after they watch that debate. One version of that person is, this guy is super selfish, just wants to do it for himself, and he doesn't care about anybody. The other person comes out of it saying, holy crap, that guy is no part of anything that the establishment has going on, and I just want to take down the establishment, and this is the guy to do it. This is the bull in the china shop that we need to break apart this stale cemented political parties that have fractured this country, and this is the guy to make changes. So I think those are the two kind of people that come out of that kind of video. And for those who are curious, go back and watch. You don't have to listen. You can watch a famous supercut on YouTube about all the quips and the things he like dogs Jeb Bush and all these people, and it's amazing to watch. And it's just him like basically calling out the whole Republican Party, saying, no, that's why the crowd is booing me, because you have the special interest people who are funding the people and all this stuff, and it's great. And it was the first time where I saw where I'm like, dang. And I didn't think he was going to win at all in 2016. I was like, no way. Like, Hillary's going to win it. The system,
the primary?
Yeah. Well, no, I didn't. I was just talking about the general election. Like, I thought for sure Hillary's going to win it. It's all rigged, the system and all that. But then when he won, I was surprised. I'm like, oh, our system still works. That's really interesting. Okay, cool. And then it was on from there. But anyway, back to Reagan. I think it's cool that, and this guy's also, I kind of like him, just seeing him talk. But to also see like the cuts he made, the deregulation as well that Trump and Reagan, I think, did Reagan brought in deregulation, I think, right?
Yeah, to a certain extent.
Yeah, to a certain extent. Yeah. Trump really brought a lot in. But you have that correlation. They both focus on prioritize like low unemployment from what I was researching, as well as making things more friendly for smaller businesses or just business in general. And both invest in the sovereignty of America. And they seek to both end wars in some form or another.
Yeah, and the one thing too that I think really sort of encapsulates what American politics should be like is both, while being wealthier, both were more of an everyman type, because money can change people. And old money, like when you come from money, that can really shape who you are and how you relate to people. But then sometimes, every now and again, you'll get people like Trump, you'll get people like Reagan, who, despite having money, are more normal, more everyday kind of people.
Right.
So they might not necessarily feel the struggles of the common man all the time, but they understand how the common man thinks. They empathize with the common man.
Right.
And also they don't come from the sort of highly incestuous,
that's a good word to use. Let's keep using it.
Environment of that normally breeds,
for this situation,
normally breeds politicians. Yeah. They're sort of coming from their own apolitical world into the political sphere to try and solve a problem. Like Reagan was an actor. He
just didn't like communism.
He starred in westerns. He didn't come from a family of politicians. He didn't start off life as a community organizer or anything like that, which is, the normal sort of like first rung on the ladder for politicians. It seems like they never actually get a real job. They go to college, they get a law degree or whatever, and then they become a community organizer and then work their way up to actual elected office from there. But, Reagan was an actor. Trump was a real estate guy. They came from outside of politics into the political sphere because there was problems that needed to be solved.
Right. Well, Reagan came up through the actors, whatever that was, and he was the head of the Screen Actors Guild, I guess it's called.
Yeah.
And so he kind of saw, a little bit of how politics worked. He probably despised it, and that's why he didn't necessarily stay in that position. But it's more of a practical, down to earth, like you said, but more common sense. If somebody has a business and you got to make it work logically and realistically, and make it the actual business run. The thing I saw real common aspects about Reagan and Trump is their ability to communicate. Completely different styles. Reagan was polished because he was campaigning for Goldwater, which was a hardcore conservative, and the fight against communism, everything, which it's not as much physical domination of the world in communism. It's more of an ideology now that people are trying to incorporate in all the different governments of the world. But Reagan was just transparent in his communication. Trump's a little bit different. He's really simplistic in his communication, and the thing that's funny is he'll repeat himself like 4 times about the same statement, and he doesn't change the statement. He just says it 4 times, and by the time he gets done talking for 5 minutes, you know exactly what he meant because he repeated it so many times. But he does it in a pretty unique style that's not too annoying. But his Trump style is it really hits you hard the first time you see how he deals with people in debates, in the primary and the general election. Reagan was a little bit more subtle in insulting people. I won't use your youth and inexperience as an excuse, whatever the end of that quote was.
To or something like that.
Yeah. And it was a backhanded, slap in the face, but he did it in such a.
I will not let age be the focus of this election or something like that.
Age and inexperience. Inexperience in this election. And I actually watched that speech with Mondale. Mondale was a pretty scary guy. He's probably close to Kamala Harris and Bernie Sanders in ideology. Whoa. In 1988.
Whoa.
No, that was 84.
84, yeah.
And you could just see it, if he got behind everything that a president can do, that seemed pretty scary. And Hillary Clinton, anyway.
Scariness, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of funny too, seeing how just effective Trump's communication style was, because it engages the everyman, but it puts off, it annoys and irritates the people it was meant to annoy and irritate.
Right.
And engages and draws in everybody else, which is really funny because even though his communication style is, I would not call Trump one of the great orators of our time necessarily, right. But it's so funny. It's like people think he's dumb, but he's not. His communication style is crafted and very honed. It accomplishes what it needs to. It doesn't. Right. And he doesn't have to sound, like Cicero giving a speech before the Roman Senate,
An orator.
Yeah, exactly. Doing it because it accomplishes what he needs it to accomplish, which is really interesting to see, because most of the time politicians really try to be gifted orators. Right. Obama was a gifted orator. Joe Biden, before his mental decline, was a very gifted orator.
Very good. Yeah, if you look at especially the what's the justice he was going against when in the 80s?
I don't know.
Supreme Justice Thomas. Yeah, I was watching some of the hearings that Biden spoke.
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
Pretty bad, but man, that guy can sure speak really well.
Yeah. You wonder what happened. But anyway.
Where did he go?
Yeah, so anyway, Biden, gifted orator. Obama, gifted orator. But as wonderful as their speech was to listen to, didn't really mean a whole lot, because their agendas were hidden. Mm-hmm. Trump, his communication style completely different, and yet it accomplishes what it needs to accomplish.
Right, which gets into polarization, which has always been a evil term in politics, because you're polarizing and separating the camps. But Trump's ability to polarize people exposes for them for who they are.
Yep.
And that is a different element added to polarization, which I haven't heard anybody talk about, but it's what I see in politics today, is exposing people and laying, I don't know if he does it on purpose or not, but he lays a lot of traps for people to fall in and expose who they really are, which is amazing, because it's the hardest thing to do is to say, you believe this, how do I get you to say actually what you believe? But he does it by floating ideas. He'll do things, and the way he communicates what he did irritates people that are completely against him. And then they go off the handle and just expose who they are by their actions and their words. It's I think it's funny, but I haven't seen a lot of people be able to do that.
Yeah. That is it's a rare talent, because politicians, I think, spend their whole lives trying to avoid saying what they really believe.
Right.
Because for so long, the game has been tell people what they want to hear and then get in and
do whatever you want.
Exactly. And so having someone who can consistently get people to just out themselves, that's a rare skill.
Well, I think it's definitely a skill. Like when you just look at him, it's definitely a skill he's had lots of time to practice with, not just because he's old, but because he's been in business a very long time, and you know, straight shooter, making the deal, the art of the deal, that kind of thing. And I think I was talking to who was I talking to? And they said, "Man, have you read it?" And I was like, "What? The Art of the Deal?" And I was like, "Nah." And he's like, "Oh, dude, it's really freaking good, especially if you're gonna start a business. It's something that's a must read." And I was like, "Interesting, okay." But then you think about it, and you're like, he comes from that world, and as well as he is who he is, and unapologetically so. And it's just kind of cool to see a politician be that way. There's some people who try to mimic that and pretty much fail. I remember this last election cycle, we had the primaries, and it was pretty much Nikki Haley, DeSantis, Vivek, or Trump. And I think everybody was like, "Oh yeah, Trump's going to get it." But there's a lot of people like me who are thinking, you know what, DeSantis might get it. I don't think it'll be Nikki or Vivek. The Republicans really try to get Nikki going in there because they know she'll appeal to special interests and that kind of thing. But especially with war. But and who's to say the others would or wouldn't, you know? But it was really interesting to see the conversation around just friends and family and saying, "Oh, it might be DeSantis. Oh, no, but it's Return of the Jedi. Trump should come back, you know?" And it's like, it was just a fun conversation around locally here with people. I remember talking to Sarah about it. I'd be like, "I don't know, Sarah, might be DeSantis." She's like, "No, Trump's got to come back." But yeah, for polarization, it's interesting because sunlight is the best disinfectant.
That's right.
And when you tell the truth, it shines a light on it. And it's really it's a very effective tool that should be used, I think, more sometimes.
And it really puts into focus, you know, because freedom of speech is one of the foundational tenets of American democracy. And this kind of really puts that into focus. The idea that you put, when the ideas are out there plainly for everyone to see, generally the best ideas are the ones that win. For a long time, it's like ideas have always been highly controlled in the political sphere. You know, the people let on what they want you to hear, but what they're not telling you is what's important. So someone who can come in and make people tell you what they really think in the political sphere is been a much needed breath of fresh air.
And I think, sorry, go for it.
And we're talking about like one thing too is we've spent some time talking up Trump, and one thing I want to say is it's not necessarily because Trump is like the best leader president we could possibly have kind of a thing.
No.
There's his ideas don't represent, I think, what American conservatism is all about, and his ideas certainly don't necessarily represent what don't fully represent what like a biblical sort of conservative viewpoint should be. He's said a lot of things over the years and done a lot of things that aren't what you would call good. But what I think is really important is the skills that he does have put us on track to be better in the future. Because now that we have somebody who is, plain spoken, who can connect with ordinary people, who can get the established politicians to out themselves for who they really are, it's sort of emboldened a lot of people who can carry the torch forward in a better way than Trump can, I think, in the future. And that's where I think Trump's it was truly important for Trump to be elected when he was. We were kind of at a turning point, in our history as a nation, and we really needed something to get us back on the right track.
Right.
And so now that thing has happened, now you have people like J.D. Vance, who I didn't even know existed before this, but like you listen to him like tear into reporters, tear into politicians, and it's
Zelensky.
it's like and more than just Zelensky, like him addressing the World Economic Forum and just like going to town is like on how bad Europe has strayed from what should be universal Western values like freedom of speech, and it's like now, like he's inspired a whole group of people who would not normally have had a way into the political system. And now we truly have, it seems like for the first time in many, many years, it seems like we truly have a choice in who we want to represent us in office, instead of do we want one flavor of con man or the other flavor of con man?
Which we've had for the longest of times, probably.
Which brought up the view of a lot of people that consider themselves moderate or middle of the road, is they say it doesn't matter who you elect. Somebody's lying to get in position to do what they want. But to me, it always mattered what the end goal was, and I didn't like seeing conservatives or Republicans lying, because just looking at their lifestyle and the choices that they made in office, you knew they were lying just to get elected because they were talking moderate, but they were more conservative, or maybe they were more moderate and they were talking conservative to a conservative group, and it's disingenuous. It's not genuine at all to see somebody in that position.
Mm-hmm.
And I think something that's really helped out, especially in our current age, not the internet by itself, but the ability to have long form conversations. I think we have a lot to thank for the internet for expounding on just the issues of the day. And I'm not saying there's a way to listen to all of it out there, but if you look in the right places and have found some revelation in a lot of the long form conversations like podcasts or a Joe Rogan or even Rubin Report back in the day and during the first Trump era was really interesting in bringing to light a lot of different people and perspectives and to really nail down what's important and what the issues really are and what a solution could be for those things, which always made me so mad whenever in-party fighting happened on either side, because, you know, it's an age, it's a story, tale as old as time in that sense. But the long-form conversation not only helped deliver a pinpoint on what's important and where people's focus is, but also exposing those who couldn't get it past an hour, who couldn't expound themselves or get ideas more than 90 minutes, who really couldn't figure out what to say outside of a 15-minute speech, as well as do these policies survive in a conversation that lasts more than a 15-minute speech versus just saying a clip that'll be on the news in a half-hour segment. Mm-hmm. So I think that we have a lot to thank for the Joe Rogans out there and just other podcasts that would just explore those political ideas and ideologies. And eventually, as the culture war progressed through the Trump era, and especially the first era, into the 2020s, it was really nice to, especially, I followed Tim Cast a lot and Tim Pool, who's not perfect, obviously, but he's a really dang good journalist. And he's had some really interesting people on throughout the years. And that's how I found out about Vivek, Kash Patel, quite a other few people. Tulsi Gabbard was on Joe Rogan, and a lot of other people that are now in the administration. And these people started having conversations back during Trump's first term and during Biden's, the last term, you know, of presidency. But to hear their voices and to actually hear what they have to say made me really think and really get to expose the good ideas and the bad, because the good ideas will probably win out in the end, and it seems like they have so far. But it's just discernment, really, and it seems like the discernment was levied during the election here. But I don't know. What do you guys think about all this? The time we live in, the conversations. I know Gavin Newsom's got a podcast now because since Trump won, he's trying to get a little bit of that voting thing back to his side. So it's interesting, especially having Charlie Kirk on as the first guest was very fascinating. But I feel like our good old Governor Newsom is just getting ready. He's getting ready, and
well, I guess he had a podcast. And then he started a new podcast with. Oh,
he did a new
one? Somebody said he had a podcast. Nobody heard of it, but
yeah, he just started it after the election.
No, the first one before.
Oh, he had one before
this last fall. Yeah, but I didn't know that until somebody brought that up. But the word progressive is really applicable to the liberal movement, because if they don't keep moving to the left, then they're not progressive. They're not progressing in that direction, and they have a goal to change the country to something that it is right now. And the word progressive, I thought that's really a deceptive term until I saw the results of progressivism, and because that's why they're really fighting now, the Democratic Party, to stay in the same direction and not go back to the center. That's retreat for them. Mm-hmm. They have to go progressively to the left to stay in the same motion they've been going for like 40 years.
Yeah, it's so interesting how seeing the evolution of the term progressive over the years, because it's been used to describe very different people. Because back in the day, you had Theodore Roosevelt was self-described as a progressive.
I love looking up stuff about Theodore Roosevelt. It's hilarious.
while of course, I'm not saying that Theodore Roosevelt was necessarily, aligned with perfectly aligned with modern conservative values either. He's very different than the kind of people that term applies to nowadays.
Right.
So,
well, he started a lot of motion where government was the answer to every problem. And that's what progressive is going to, is a totally socialistic and eventually, if they have to, Marxist way of governing, because they think people are too stupid to know what is really going on. And they have to insert their ideology and their way of doing things because they believe that they are a higher class that needs to rule over a common class.
Yeah, which is really funny because a lot of people with those ideas are themselves being played by forces beyond their understanding.
Right.
The term I hear a lot, which I think is really applicable to these types of people, is useful idiots. And you see this time and time again. You have this class of this sort of intelligentsia, this young, college-aged, educated sort of people, really pushing a Marxist or a socialist kind of movement. And then when the actual communist revolution happens, those are the first people to get lined up against the wall and shot. And it's really sad to see. It's sad to see in a sense because they never see it coming.
Right.
They're being played by forces beyond their control.
Right, which gets us back to democracy. You mentioned democracy. That United States intent of the government is not a pure democracy. It's a representative republic. And unfortunately, it hasn't been taught a lot that we're taking the responsibility we were given to vote for people to represent us.
Mm-hmm.
And that sets things into motion where we basically have some control over what happens in government, but we're putting a lot of trust in the people that are representatives because we're actually telling them what to do with our lives. And that's a big responsibility.
Well, I think that's kind of the thing with any government. And one thing I will say is I hear this a lot. It's like the United States isn't a democracy; it's a republic. And well, that's true. That's true in a certain limited sense.
Yeah.
I don't think it's very useful because a representative republic is like because democracy is kind of like an overarching concept.
Mm-hmm.
People think of democracy in terms of like mob rule, and so
pure democracy, unfiltered democracy,
which isn't. I mean, so when you hear people talking about it as like democracy is authoritarianism going the speed limit and all phrases like that, they're talking about a model of. They're talking about a very specific kind of governance where enough voices are raised about a particular issue or set of issues, and one guy comes in and says, "Give me the power and I'll fix everything," and they give him the power, and then he, takes control, and you end up with a totalitarian dictatorship.
Right.
And so I see that a lot where people are like trying to like every time someone connects the United States government to the word democracy, they're like, "Oh no, don't do that. Don't do that. We're not a democracy." And I get it. I get it. You know, we don't want that kind of democracy in this country.
It's called the mobocracy.
Yeah, we don't want that in this country.
Right.
But also, you know, it kind of like muddies up the waters in political conversation.
It's getting down to defining terms.
Yeah.
Because where we're in a state where we can put a petition on the ballot and it becomes law is closer to pure democracy than states that just send representatives and don't have that petition mode to have influence on government and what they can do. The whole idea behind the government was to establish law so people can be free to live their lives. But it's morphed into, we're here to control you because you're too stupid. You know, the whole idea of socialism, you're too stupid to make decisions for yourself, so we have to make decisions for you. And it's kind of irritating to me, but
yeah, and that's the thing too, is people like the type of government that the United States is requires a lot of responsibility from the people who are the ones being governed.
Right.
And that's kind of the we've been kind of reaping the consequences of that, I think, for a while, because people have been lax in their responsibilities. They've allowed themselves to, you know, like, they've allowed themselves to sort of slip back into the mode of, you know, if I have a concern, I just need to make sure the government knows what my concern is so they can fix it and they can take care of it. I hand the person who says they'll take care of me the reins of power, and then they do it. And so we've been kind of reaping the rewards of that for a while. I think a lot of people have got into the political system that shouldn't have been in there in the first place, and it's because people were lax about who they elected, and what they were willing to tolerate, and all that kind of a thing. So it's like the American political system, I think, is the greatest on earth, but it requires a lot of responsibility from its citizens.
More participation.
Yeah, it requires it requires things to be strong from the ground up, not from the top down.
Right.
And so if the foundation is weak, things at the top are going to be corrupt. And so now we've gotten to a point where enough people have woken up. They've gotten woke.
Oh,
You did it. You said it.
Enough
Double
people have
entendre.
people have sort of woken up to that I think we have a real opportunity to reverse the damage that's been done.
Right. Well, the big problem is bureaucracy, that unelected people are hired to make decisions for us. And it's even out of the realm of our influence now, because the elected people don't even know what the bureaucracy is doing. Or if they do know what they're doing, they're trying to hide it because they got an agenda they're doing through employed people by the government. And kind of distasteful to me, because I'm in the construction and building industry from the standpoint. I've done a lot of building, but I've also I do plans all the time that have to go to the government to be approved. There's part of a bureaucracy that says, well, they're law enforcement basically, and they say, this is the law and this is what you drew. We think you should add this to the plans. And but the regulation behind California building industry, there's like 11 code books, and each code book is like 7 to 1,000 pages long. And it's I don't know, it might even be bigger than the IRS law, but it's crazy because no way any one person could grasp all of that and say this is a definitive answer. Through application, you actually are able to basically, okay, this pretty much works out for everybody. We're going to do it this way. And you learn that over time. And I've been in it for 47 years in the architectural end of things. And it's really added the cost to building a house because there's so much regulation and hoops you got to jump through, mandated requirements that probably make a house close to almost double what it should cost to build. There should be law, there should be reason, there should be a standard, but that law should be okay. Like if somebody's building a spec house, and it's here to protect the people. Laws are here to protect people, right? There should be a standard and say, okay, let's have like 4 tiers of houses. And if this house doesn't meet any of them, it's a lesser value house than if it meets California's tier 1 house. And that's the way it should be. Like the energy requirements, which is one of the 11 building codes, in itself adds so much cost to it. It's crazy. Mandated solar panels and insulation and all that.
Yeah.
Do you want to know how many permits they've given out since the Palisade fires down in Southern California?
Probably about 100.
Ooh, 23 permits.
Oh,
23 permits in the last 100 days since.
Well, we saw that
fires.
through the campfire in Paradise.
Yep, that too. That
and
took years.
By the time FEMA comes in and verifies that everything is safe and legal, and then the county or city,
And
whatever
rare?
jurisdiction you're
sorry,
dealing
that's
with,
too late.
is saying, okay, we got to be cautious, and the government's on our back to do this or not to do this. Yeah, most people couldn't get a permit within a year.
Yeah, it's crazy here in the state.
And that's the thing too, is a lot of what you see is like, it's so dressed up in like, oh, we just, it's all about public safety. But it's like when you actually look at the regulations that are in place for things like building and whatnot, it's not, they're not doing it for the benefit and protection of people who are building houses or buying houses or living in houses. They're doing it they're doing it to add complexity to it so that you got to pay these people money to make sure that you're not running afoul of these complex regulations that no one person could possibly comprehend.
And there's another component that's almost as strong as the financial incentive for bureaucracy to bring money into their division of the government, and that's control. The bureaucracy, by definition, is an agency it feeds on control, because they're important, and you can't live without me. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to exact control of your life to make sure that you always need me. So it's an employment, what's it called? Guaranteed
Job safety,
job security,
There we
job
go.
security,
Yep.
And it's the higher ups in the bureaucracy is about bringing money to support that agency to keep it alive and growing. Bureaucracy, by definition, also always has to progress in growing.
That's what you see too with like our military budget is insane. And part of the reason why it's so insane is because all these, I have some coworkers and some people I know who were in the military, and the kind of stuff, the stories I hear of them like throwing ammunition, like literal big old pallets full of like truck tires and ammo and fuel and whatever else you can think of, just like throwing them off boats, getting rid of them, just wasting enormous quantities of resources.
And the reason why?
And the reason why they do that is to keep their budget up. If they keep their budget up,
interesting,
then they know they'll have that money for next year.
Right.
If it turns out that they didn't use everything that their budget allowed for, then what they're budgeted for next year goes down. And so there's an incentive to keep the budget up as high as possible so that you know you're going to have enough money to do what you need to do. And it just feeds into more and more and more and more waste.
Right.
Because there's never any point in the process where somebody says, well, we got to cut down on this, this, and this, and this to make the things more sustainable, to make things more workable, make things more efficient. Right. No, all that goes out the window in the name of keeping the budget as big as possible.
Right. If they knew, hey, the budget was 20% less this year because we didn't use all this stuff, and they knew, okay, we can get that full budget next year if we need it, but the incentive is crazy. But hopefully it's changing in the right direction.
Yeah, that's the thing too, is like when you like things are like the government prioritizes efficiency, but in name only.
Right. It needs to be merit based.
They put on the air of being concerned about efficiency, but they're really not, which leads to all sorts of excesses.
Right.
Because people are just trying to find ways to game the system to make sure that they have the money keeps flowing in,
Right.
Most definitely. Sounds like we live in such a wonderful land of California. California.
Oh, yeah.
But the next thing I want to dive in with you guys on is I had a conversation with a coworker of mine who we talked about just current political stuff, what's going on. And we were just talking about Trump and how funny he is. And this person was more on the negative side of like, yeah, I don't know what he's doing. All these tariffs, like our friends are Canada and Mexico. Like, why are we going against them is what this person said, as well as, I brought up Tulsi, and this was the only thing I pushed back on this coworker on. I was like, no, well, Tulsi, I'm gonna have to push back on that because I kind of like her. She's a real badass, honestly, in my opinion, all this stuff. And then their response to that was, you better be careful. Did you listen to the hearing? I'm like, actually, yeah, I listened to like 4 of the 6 hours she talked it was like, I listened to all 3 hours and like 42 minutes of her hearing, confirmation hearing for the intelligence, or not intelligence. Yeah. So I listened to all of that. And this person's like, well, you gotta be careful. She's got some Russian talking points. And I was like, okay, I think I know where this person's getting their information. They go on Reddit a lot, by the way. So, but
the reason why the word Redditard is in common use.
Well, I think about that. I haven't
heard that.
I think it's better you don't know. I think about when I was working at the store. We live in a very rural area, and it's hilarious because one night, I think it was like a special night where we're serving like people from prom and a bunch of high schoolers, and somebody came in and they said, yeah, Ariel's boyfriend went down and stole the Kamala Harris and the Biden Harris sign down there from the from the neighbor, and he just stole it in his Chevy truck and drove it down the road. He's got it in the back of his truck right now. And I thought that was hilarious, but I was like, that's not cool. That's stealing somebody else's property, but nevertheless, it is kind of funny. Like somebody but it's wrong. It's wrong.
Stealing's bad, guys.
Stealing's bad, guys. I think
In case you didn't know that.
But I think about the perspective of those that, who voted for the other way, and they don't understand. Way. They don't
like the other white meat.
Pork. But they tell me stuff like, "Hey, watch out for Tulsi. She's got Russian talking points." And there's a lot of things I was curious about hearing in her hearing specifically, but we don't have to get into them. But I hear that. But you also hear people saying like, "What is Trump doing? Why is he doing this tariff thing?" I want to dive into a little bit of that and what do you guys think of it? Because especially with the immigration and tariff thing, because the immigration thing's interesting because you look at it and they're trying to deport nearly 10 plus million, estimated 10 plus million, even more potentially illegal people that have gotten into this country. It's definitely more than 10 million. I'll tell you that. But the judges are blocking it at the moment. And it's really interesting to see that because I guess in some way they have a right, but it's not a real fair way to think of it because I don't think it's fair that they're blocking it because the people that got into this country, they were arms wide open. We had them download an app. I think it's NS1B or NSB1.
CBP1.
CBP1. It's an app you download. You tell them, you put in your information, and then they ship you off wherever. And they give you a debit card or a credit card and and you can apply for a license, whatever. So it's like we've let a ton of people in here and it's just stifled the economy. And the only reason they're here is to get more delegate votes for people in Democrat areas, from what I can tell. And it's really, really horrible. And that's the one thing I am glad we're doing about it is we're going in, getting the military, and we're just locking down that border, which is good. But I want to hear what you guys think, as well as, we don't have to do tariffs. We can get into that too. But I want to talk about the border tariffs as well as Elon. Like this coworker also told me, well, you guys, Elon's making all these changes. And you know what? USAID, that he got USAID closed. We had a lot of intelligence in a lot of areas that they shut funding down. And now we don't know what's going on in those areas. And it's like that. Okay, whatever, dude. But there's way more to it than just that. But what do you guys think about all this? And you can take it in any which way you want and start whichever way.
So you got immigration,
Elon, and tariffs.
Wow.
The judge is blocking the illegals, saying that everybody needs to have a fair case, which makes no sense because they came in here without a trial. So
one thing actually I would like to hit on is USAID.
Yeah.
USAID.
You're very familiar with them, I hear.
Yeah. As a former recipient myself. No. Oh, one thing.
This is why we're going to start a Patreon, guys.
One thing about USAID is it's kind of it's the way it's been talked about has been kind of propaganda because if like you look at the acronym USAID, it looks like it US aid. So that already puts an idea in your head about what's the purpose of this agency, what it's supposed to do. And so you have all these people upset because, it's like, but we want to, if America and American values are so great, we should be wanting to spread that all over the world and, funding all these, poor, starving people, in third world countries and whatnot. It's like they deserve some good coming their way too. And how could you be so cruel and heartless to shut all this down? It's like, that's not the purpose of USAID. USAID is primarily for to allow the U.S. government to gain a foothold in other countries so that our government can meddle in their affairs. And that's not a very widely talked about fact. In fact, it's not even really talked about at all, even on the conservative side. Most of the time, the conservative talk on the issue is focused around the more ridiculous things that were seemingly being funded like transgender surgeries in Nicaragua and, just
Gender studies in Africa.
ridiculous things like that.
Right.
And while, those things are ridiculous and our taxpayer dollars shouldn't be funding such ridiculous things.
Because they 100% were going to stuff like that, right?
Like that's not
absolutely.
That's not the root of the issue. Like, honestly, all that stuff was just a cover up.
Oh, yeah.
It basically, the only reason why they were funding transgender operas in South America or, like gender equity in Cambodia, stuff like that, is because that's a pretext for the U.S. government to gain a foothold in that country so they can meddle. So that intelligence agencies can meddle in those countries' affairs. The history is well documented at this point of what this government has done in other sectors, in other corners of the world to try and gain control. And it's like, if we have a government that's by the people, for the people, we don't want to be spending our tax money on initiatives for the CIA to destabilize other regimes. We're not American taxpayer money should not be going towards, regime change and meddling in foreign governments, right?
Right.
And that should be a cut and dried issue. But the problem is the conversation around it has been so propagandized that people just get all emotional and they start gushing about how we're cutting off aid to all these poor, unfortunate people overseas, and how could they do this? And it's like, you can't even have a conversation at that point.
Did you see the Muslim Sesame Street thing they did? Did you see that?
No.
Dude, you got
the one in Iran.
Yeah, the one in
Iraq.
Iraq, that was it. It wasn't Iran, it was Iraq. And it's legit a Muppet show that characters looking very similar to Sesame Street in skits that portray life in Iraq, and these Muppets literally have like guns and they're like shooting like people and like protecting their town in quotes and everything. And it's like, wow. And literally some of the footage from this, you can literally see the wall. Some of the sets in the background have wallpaper that says USAID. Legit. And the same thing with places, I think, in the not Philippines, but some Pacific Asia country of some kind. I remember seeing screenshots of that where or photos, and it has the same thing, USAID. And it turns out that was supposed to be for gender studies in a school, but something else was tied to it. I also found here, Libs of TikTok on Twitter reports this, who actually, the freebeacon.com reports that Stacey Abrams, Doge, Elon stuff, founded $2 billion in taxpayer funds linked to Stacey Abrams down in Georgia. Right. Which is crazy. 2 nonprofits she founded that got greenlit last year. Turns out they had $100 of total revenue listed, but they were granted a grant of $2 billion. Right. Which is like, it's just obvious corruption at this point. Like, it's very apparent.
Well, and that's the problem with bigger bureaucracies is it's too much opportunity to hide money to feed corruption and give it to an organization that might be your in-laws' connections, and they're gonna benefit from this happening, and it's just they can't even find a lot of the money, that goes through the government. The Pentagon never having a balance or a reconciled budget for how many decades?
Yeah, God. Yeah.
That's ridiculous, It's easy to earmark all the payments that go out, and you can know exactly what's happening, especially in the technology that we have. but corruption is the biggest child of an overbloated and oversized government.
So you guys think this is a good thing we're getting rid of it?
Yeah,
I think so.
I would say so. Yeah.
Get rid of that corruption. All right, tariffs. What about the tariffs then? Woo! It's gonna get pricey around here. Well,
Oh, man.
the reality is, in fact, I just got a new phone this week, which was hilarious because
I like tariffs.
you like tariffs, yeah. I mean, Alexander Hamilton liked them too. To be fair,
Oh, yeah?
yeah, from what I was reading.
Well, given his play that's so popular, he must have been one of those woke liberals. No, I'm just kidding.
For his time.
Yeah, and he sang a lot, and rapped. But no, like they're implementing them. Now there's a 90-day pause, except for China. And I think this has been a really interesting negotiation tactic for our country to levy not just our market that we have that everybody wants to sell to, but it also stops China from flooding that market with shiato stuff that will just kind of devalue everything that it's been doing for the last several decades. So it's a great levy to kind of bring manufacturing back. But what do you guys think in the sense of are things gonna get more pricey? Are they not? Are there going to be exemptions on certain things?
Definitely.
Certain companies even?
The price is going to go up. The people importing are going to pay some of that because they still have to compete. And the only thing I'm worried about, and there's a lot of good because you need to balance the trade deficit with other countries, and also all the other stuff they won't allow into the country, any particular country from our country, just because they're trying to protect an industry or whatever. The thing I'm concerned about on tariffs is responsible people actually applying the extra money coming into the government, because a tariff goes to the U.S. government. You got to make sure that that's being applied to the deficit.
Yep.
Directly. I mean, every cent that comes in on a tariff should be applied to the deficit, because the deficit is the biggest, one of the biggest problems we have as a functioning government. Is we're way, if we're spending more on the deficit each year than the military.
And that was one of the biggest criticisms I was reading about Reagan specifically was...
Right. And everybody since then, because they promised, they promised we're going to reduce the deficit.
We're going to reduce it.
And you got to Newt Gingrich in the 90s, and Bill Clinton actually...
Here he goes, David, watch out.
He actually... Clinton went along with them, and actually, they had a balanced budget for, I think, 2 or 3 years. They didn't apply anything to the debt, but they reduced the deficit and got it balanced. But the debt, I probably said deficit earlier. The debt is just the interest alone. Paying the interest is over $1 trillion or something.
Oh yeah, I mean, and
each year.
Yeah, and that has to do, I'm not an expert in economics or anything like that, but I'm sure that has something to do with Social Security and how that functions and everything. Because I've always been told in my life, like, oh, Social Security is going to run out by 2027 or 2030 or whatever.
Sure, if it's on the same track, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, I guess I can say goodbye to any of that when I'm older, because I probably won't be able to get any of that if I do get any, But I think it's cool that this is going to be a tactic for the future, for going forward, to help protect that next generation,
right?
To kind of help them as well, because especially with the cost of living in this country, it's really out of control. Right. Not just inflation. Before this inflation stuff was crazy after COVID, like even before that, it was really bad. Like I think medium household income, if you take the medium household income and the average cost of living in this country, you're still in the negative about $30,000 or so, give or take. And it's like, wow. To pay for everything that you had to pay for in the 50s and pay for today, like same different things, just necessities, There was a thing that I saw in a video this guy did, and it was took stuff that listed everything you needed to pay for, like all your average bills in the 50s, and taking those bills and adjusting them for today. You have a deficit of like $30,000 for the average household of 4, basically. And that's over time. But there's other numbers you can pull from there, and people make out their way different ways. But the point is, it's just getting too much. And people like my generation aren't gonna be able to, afford houses. They don't even afford a house now, so and that's a more nuanced discussion than what I just said. But there's got to be a point where the government has to fix itself. And the people might have to hurt for a little bit, but if it fixes it long term, then cool.
Yeah. That's the one thing too, is a lot of criticism is levied against Trump for this tariff strategy. And
I love levy and tariff in the same sentence. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Trump gets a lot of criticism for this. And a lot of the criticism, I'm not even gonna necessarily call it bad or wrong-headed necessarily. There's like even people who seem very knowledgeable, and from what I can see, because I'm not an economist, what's his name? Thomas Sowell is a guy who every time I read quotes by him or him explaining things, it's like, man, he seems to really get things, especially from an economics perspective. And even he has criticisms of Trump's tariff plans.
He's the only one I've seen that really I have confidence in analyzing international or national economics that has been against tariffs. I was surprised to see that, but the tariffs just is an attempt to level the playing field, where we don't have a 400,000 or whatever, or 400 billion year deficit with other countries. The money's going out of this country into other countries, to produce stuff, and it needs to be more equalized.
Yeah, and the one thing is about all these tariffs is there's a lot of criticism that is coming from intelligent people, it seems like, about all these tariffs. But like, what I don't think is talked about is if things continue as they are, that things in this country are going to take a nosedive real fast.
Especially after all the money printing we've did in the last 5 years during COVID, which was insane in itself.
Yeah, well, that added to it.
That added to it.
Yeah, eventually there's going to be a point. Eventually there's going to be a point where the chickens are going to come home to roost, and things are not going to be great.
Yeah.
So at this point, there needs to be someone with a vision who can say, okay, we're going to do things differently now to try and head off this problem. Because, like, honestly, if we continue as we were, we're screwed. That's just the cold, hard reality of it. So whether or not tariffs are the way forward, whether or not Trump has a perfect vision for fixing the economy in this country, like, that's less important than the fact that we have another way. We have another way than what we've been doing all this time.
Right.
And we got to try it and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, then we got to try something else and see if that works.
Well, manufacturing is the biggest benefit, because the focus for the last 40 years or whatever on trying to get a better job with a better education to provide for your family and everything, it's reached its limit like 20 or 30 years ago. And then, but there's a lot of the medium and maybe even low skilled people that are not available to work in factories because there's just no factories to do that. And you don't have to be a computer technician, just everybody's skilled at something. That's what I've learned, that everybody has a skill of something, and there should be no reason for not working. Even if you have mental or disabilities in other areas, there's always something you can do. And I think that's kind of the wrong direction we've been heading, because people think that, oh, well, if they can't be a manager over 100 people in a company, then what use do you have?
Yeah. And that's one of the things too, is like, since time immemorial, like the beating heart of economies has been what people produce. And so
that leads to growth, I should say.
Yeah,
manufacturing will generally lead to growth.
So if you don't have, you absolutely have to have a diverse, robust manufacturing economy in this country, or we're just going to wither away.
Right.
And so whether or not tariffs produce good or bad results in the short term, something has got to be done to entice manufacturing to come back to here, or we're doomed, honestly.
Yeah,
well, and there's most people think manufacture is a big company that employs 100,000 people out of a city into a single building.
Yeah.
But there's so much micro manufacturing, machine shops or whatever, that can produce stuff that, if we had an equal opportunity from an economic standpoint, we can. The people could start businesses and employ people locally on a small scale. But if you get 100,000 of those, then you're employing, tens of millions of people.
And that's where deregulation comes into play.
Right.
People hear deregulation, they're like, oh no, the safety standards.
Right.
But what they don't realize is the regulation, like, our government is bought and paid for by big corporations. And I'm not some kind of like bleeding heart liberal here saying this. It's a fact.
We already found out that.
That's the sort of the stereotype, is like, conservatives are all about the corporations and the liberals don't like the corporations.
Really? Is that the case? Huh?
I'm just trying to say is like,
it's funny how that opinion lines up with Microsoft, Apple, Google, Facebook.
Yeah, so I'm no bleeding heart liberal here, but it's a fact that our government is essentially bought and paid for by corporate lobbyists.
Right.
And the problem is, with so much regulation, is the lobbyists are the ones who are influencing the lawmakers in terms of what regulation gets passed.
Yep.
Right.
The regulation in this country is not, holding down the robber barons of the corporations from unleashing their full terror upon us.
Monopolies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, the regulations are in large part tailored to keep out smaller competition.
Right.
Because larger corporations, all the red tape is nothing to them.
Yeah, they can
But the amount of red tape.
In reality, they have a bigger investment, so they're trying to, quote unquote, protect the investment.
Exactly.
It costs $1 billion to produce this big factory, and we need your government help to protect us from losing this investment. So.
Yeah, but for smaller entrepreneurs,
right.
like the amount of money it takes just to make and run a business from just the red tape perspective, is just backbreaking. Like, most businesses cannot sustain aren't sustainable simply due to the amount of money it takes to run, keep the government off their backs.
Right.
And
well, we're kind of screwed here in California.
yes,
Because even if the federal government does all this deregulation, the hope of that happening in California in the next year or two is not going to happen.
No.
yeah, where Gavin Newsom stands when he said he wants to Trump-proof California. He doesn't mean he wants to protect Californians from Trump. It means he wants to protect all his buddies who
Talk about monopolies.
Yeah, who have their claws in our government
Right.
from losing their place due to Trump's deregulations.
It's just not Newsom because he's going to be out here in 2 years.
Yeah,
But it's the state legislature and the state senate is overwhelmingly liberal.
yeah. I mean, it's the whole state. The whole state government is corrupt from top to bottom. Newsom is kind of like the figurehead of it more so,
Right.
just because he had that phrase that he specifically said. He's like, "Oh, we're gonna Trump-proof California," right on the heels of Trump's win in 2024. And it sounds really good to his supporters, like, "Oh yeah, he's gonna protect the little guy from." Trump's Trump's fascist tendencies, but no, when he means when California is going to be Trump-proofed, it mean Trump's going to bring in not just Trump, but Trump and all the people, the whole MAGA movement are going to bring in a lot of fresh, good ideas into the government, and California is not going to implement any of those.
No. All right. So I want to go back on tariffs real quick. We can talk about California all day.
Did we leave? We leave tariffs?
No, we haven't. But Dad, you said just because you're a tech, even if you're not a tech support person, there's definitely a job out there for you if we do bring back manufacturing. In fact, so two things. That's one thing. But speaking of tech people, I listened to I was watching a video by Louis Rossman on YouTube, who I generally really like. Basically, he is a small business owner in New York who has made a living off of fixing tech and that kind of thing. And he does videos every day about small businesses and laws and how crony these companies are and everything and all that kind of thing. But he had a thing about Trump's tariffs and how he said they were really bad and all this kind of stuff. And his issues were basically summarizing of, if you just take the tariffs alone, nothing's really gonna, in his mind, nothing's really gonna change and things are gonna go way up in price. But he's not taking into account the potential of lowering taxes as well as lowering spending, especially if the rumors are true that income tax, negating that completely, is the inevitable goal. If that's even true, if that is true, that's gonna make so much difference where tariffs will be a good benefactor for this country regardless, because income tax will be supplementing that.
There's an economic reality as opposed to static thinking. Static thinking is a snapshot at one moment in time, and they say, if you do this, this is going to happen.
Yeah.
But not necessarily, because it takes time and decisions from a tariff happening to the time the product actually gets to the buyer.
Yeah.
And
also, I just wanted to bring it up because that's like all over the internet, like especially in the tech scene that I follow, where everybody's saying prices are going to go up. I can't believe this is going to be so expensive. But in reality, a lot of the semiconductors are already listed on on the list of exempting for tariffs, by the way, from Taiwan specifically. And there's a couple other things as well. But the thing I wanted to bring up specifically was he wasn't taking in everything else into account. He's just looking at tariffs.
Right. Well, it's kind of a three-prong deal where tariffs is one thing to get things back into balance. That actually creates an incentive for people in the United States to produce more. It incentivizes people that have invested in other countries to produce things there to get free or really cheap labor. bring them back. And then you, like you said, you got the tax, keep the tax, income tax down, or keep it going. That's supposed to expire sometime in early fall or something. And that incentivizes growth and actually produces more money for the government, even though, because people will work more if they realize, like no tax on tips.
Yeah.
I like
overtime.
I like the fact that no tax on Social Security.
Yep.
But I don't want to be selfish about this.
No, it's going to be good for a lot of folks.
No, but it incentivizes people to work more, and they say, well, I don't mind working if I get to keep more of my money.
Yeah.
And so you have a more willing and better attitude with the workforce in the working class in the country. So it's basically a three-prong approach, but tariffs is only one.
Yeah, it's only one aspect to
It's only one leg of a three-leg stool.
Yeah. Or maybe even 4 or 5, who knows,
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. There was a quote that I have from Tucker.
Deregulation is another leg of that.
Oh, yeah.
We just talked about,
Yeah. I was watching Tucker Carlson interview, what's his name? I have it written down right here. Scott Bessinen, who's the Treasury Secretary under this current administration. And he was saying, it's a whole hour interview and I didn't get all the way through it, but basically he is saying, we're using the tariffs as basically negotiation on top of protecting the people, protecting American people. Because when I was looking at what Canada was charging when we give them milk, I'm like, holy crap, they have a 30% tariff or something like that on our milk that we give them. So they're making it more, it costs more for them to get milk there, and the people have to pay for that in the end. And I was like, and we don't charge them anything, like at all? Like what? So that's what threw off to me this whole tariff thing.
Are they really our friends?
Exactly.
Mexico and Canada.
Yeah. It's like, we have farms and everything that and again, we could do stuff without them, but this is going to be, everybody wants to sell to Americans because that's where the money is. Right. They want to sell their goods to them because that's how they're going to sell them, the best way to do it. And so why not use the ability that, as from the government's perspective, of using as a bargaining chip, saying, hey, this is our people. We want to protect them. If you want to sell to them, you got to get through us. And I think that's a really smart way of throwing a hat in the ring and then scaring everybody to back off, especially with the big tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs that he was going to do and probably will still do eventually. And things will get more expensive, but I feel like not very long. I feel like within the next 2 years, I feel like we're going to see a much better economy in general, especially with the extension of the 2017 or 18 tax cut that he had. That is going to be extended again as well. Right.
Yeah, there's also, when they're negotiating, they're not just with other countries, and hopefully, probably 90% of the countries they'll be negotiating with. It's just not about tariffs.
Yeah.
It's about other things. Well, we got this problem over here, and we need to have this dealt with in your country. It's a problem in your country, and there's a lot of negotiating that goes along with that, with, troublesome countries that are doing all kinds of stuff, Korea or whatever, North Korea.
Or Europe in general,
all the espionage or whatever that, they're stealing intellectual or technical secrets, we're an open society, but that also makes us vulnerable.
Yeah.
And
open to be taken advantage of.
Yeah, and that's what China's done, is they've really taken advantage of the intellectual and technical freedom that we have in this country and other things, and utilizing it for their benefit. So
And also, I think it's important to point out that something that this guy, Steve Besson, also said is that, or no, I'm sorry, not him. I was listening to Glenn Beck's interview with Trump he had just recently for the first 100 days or whatever. He posted it yesterday, and they were talking about tariffs, and I think the conversation shifted towards not just negotiating with countries, but also negotiating with corporations as well. That's also another facet of that where you can exempt those things as well. And I think there's plenty of people, especially like those who manufacture specifically in China, that will want to get their stuff passed. But if it's exempt under a corporation, that's different. But I think that's also another ingredient to this whole tariff thing as well. I know Apple specifically is moving away from China unlike they did in 2000 where they entered China, and now they're shifting everything toward India. And there's something I wanted to point out where people will say, well, what about Russia? You could tell this whole tariff thing's a farce because tariffs are 0% on Russia. And I was like, we don't even trade with Russia. we don't trade with them as far as I'm aware. So that's why it's 0%. We don't trade with them at all. So it's just it's much more nuanced to it.
Right. It's also an international political tool. And that's one bad thing that Biden did is he released all that money to Iran, and they've used most of that for either sponsoring terrorism in the area there or
buying weapons from us.
No, it's a nuclear program.
Oh, yeah,
they wouldn't be able to. They couldn't afford the nuclear program they have now if he wouldn't have released all that money that was froze on their accounts or whatever. It was hundreds of billions of dollars. I don't know the number, but it was a lot of moolah.
Yeah, a whole lot of moolah. So, and I thought it was funny how you said, when you said, there might not be, there might be somebody who's not all mentally there or something. Like you said earlier, and they can work in a factory or something like that. I'm like, yeah, us Americans, we're so retarded that we put us into a factory and that's a job that we can work in,
May even be happy.
May even be happy working it, I was like, oh, man. So
I've worked so many different jobs. And a lot of those are like stepping stones to really what you want to end up doing.
Yeah, exactly.
And people don't see that. I mean, we're a little bit of an entitlement era where it's a problem with the American society that, okay, we fought this war and we want to make sure we never have a war again. So people focus on improving their personal lives instead of fighting a war with another country. And then the next generation after that, they have no appreciation what the previous generations went through to get us to this point. And if we don't learn from history, we're deemed to repeat it.
Yeah.
And we could be in a position in 10 years where we're vulnerable, to either economic war or actual physical war with another country if we don't protect ourselves. And I'm not saying, go out and start blowing things up. But, you have peace through strength. You have economic security through basically what they're trying to reconcile now in manufacturing and providing jobs for people that are lower skilled is what it's called, which is a good thing because there should be an opportunity for everybody to do something they're able to do. And that's the main point.
Yeah, I think it's smart to be self-sufficient, not just as a business, but as a country. Like, it's just smart to do that.
Right, especially from an energy standpoint. It's been so crazy.
Oh, man.
Because I went through the 70s where the Middle East had 3 oil embargoes against the United States. And waiting in line just to get gas because there's a gas shortage is crazy. You don't realize how much we depend on transportation or even the freedom to go, 1,000 miles across the country. And if you're in gas lines, you don't go 1,000 miles across the country, not in comfort. You're waiting, 6 hours at each stop is stupid. And it's that alone is immense. And if we could actually export energy, that's another way. That's a big economic boost to this country.
Yeah,
because it's bringing money into the country. It's not paying other countries to provide energy for us.
Yeah, it seems like just from observing the administration and seeing what they're doing, it seems like, especially the attempt that we're gonna reopen the pipeline, we're gonna invest more in drilling. There's also Greenland. That is another factor that might come into it as well, because they're very, from what I understand, very rich underneath that ground as well. There's oil in them Greenland hills.
The white covered green hills.
The white covered green hills, exactly. But yeah, I think they're kind of putting a bunch of pieces together where we're on the right track for a much more prosperous couple of years. But again, Trump has only got a year and a half, I think, to do some of this stuff before the midterms, because who knows what's going to happen then. I feel like they're going to make it. Once we get to then, right now, he's got about that much time until he can't just pass anything through. And even right now, he's having a hard time from Congress to get stuff through as well. But at least not as bad as the first term, where he could barely get anything passed, really.
Right.
So, but I want to end it here, Dad, but I do want to ask one more question. And that is,
when am I running for Congress? No.
Yeah. Well, I just, I wanted to just say that people get tired of politics. And I've noticed in the last couple of years, and in fact, a couple months, of people, the public shift towards things, the public shift against things they're tired of. I remember during the culture war time, during the first administration, you had you're woke. These companies are woke. They want to, social justice and all this kind of, stuff like that, where it got to a point where people were just completely tired of it. And people rose up in prosperity online, and not only as a business, but personally, by reputation, where the people who pushed back against the woke stuff, in quotes, got a lot of attention, more money, that kind of thing. But then people have started to get tired of them because they've gotten a little bit too ambitious, and some people are obviously using it just for business. And they're kind of shifting away from that as well. They're starting to see through the BS, we'll say. Mm-hmm. And I think seeing through the BS is the testament of this last election, especially since everybody went through COVID and the last 4 years of that as well. It was very obvious that it was a referendum on the current administration there. So, but I do want to encourage people out there that I think it's important. The important thing is to not constantly be inundated with this stuff. Like, it's good to take a break from politics. It can be very overbearing. Some people aren't informed enough, and then when they start speaking out about it, and you can tell they don't follow it at all. The ignorance is there. But I want to encourage people to take a break from the stuff who are in it and really figure out where their strong foundation lies and what they truly value, because that's where you're going to know what's right and what's wrong, and really whether the politician you're listening to passes the sniff test, Right.
It's I think it's important to be involved enough to know and be able to, like you said, discern what's going on behind the scenes, in addition to what I said. Because I mentioned it at the beginning, I had this low level of stress I wasn't dealing with. And when I would get riled up and get caught up in the spirit of somebody that's contentious on either side, that added to the stress or anxiety in my life that I wasn't dealing with. So I just been learning to deal with, and it's through the Bible and what Jesus has done to deal with that. And it's the only way you can really deal with it is focusing on the peace that's continuously available to us that believe, that the Bible's true and that God wants to work in our life.
Mm-hmm. Amen.
And, I like the fact that truth sets us free, and that's sunlight is the best disinfectant against idiocy in this country. People continuously lying, thinking, "Oh, they'll believe it eventually," but you just gotta have a ability to see through the lies, and the only thing that will set you free is the truth.
Yeah. I also want to thank you, Dad, growing up, because I remember always on the way home from town or going to karate lessons or working at your office. I remember on the way home or on the way there, you would listen to Rush Limbaugh a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember listening to him like, hey, he's complaining about Obama again, but what else is new, But I remember one time I was first going to Butte, and I was just barely starting to trickle into politics, just barely. Like, I mostly was into tech stuff, and there was a lot of liberal people that come out of that. And so they were talking about Bernie and why he's good or whatever. This was like 2016. And I remember asking you, like, well, I don't even know if the wall is important or something like that. And you, being so gracious to me, educated me and said, well, the reason why we have it, in fact, it's been around for a very, very long time, and this and that, and this is why it's important to protect our borders, and it protects us from all kinds of people that want to come and terrorize our country, that kind of thing. So you kind of explained it to me what the wall was, and I was very humbled in that moment. I think I was like 18 or something, and that kind of motioned me to learn more about politics at that moment, but it didn't manifest till after the election, probably in 2016. But I thought that was, I always remember that. Like, yeah, I don't even know if the wall's really an important thing. And then you like educated me on the way to Chico, and I was like, oh man, I'm so dumb.
Well, I've learned a lot since then and been awakened. What was that movie that Jim Caviezel was in where they were doing human trafficking? Oh, whatever that was. And,
shoot, what was it called?
And that really awakened the fact that everything going on down at the border is just not about people trying to get into the country. People were taken advantage of, and there's the predators that were profiting off of human trafficking, sex trafficking, and coercing people to pay money to pay off the debt to be able to be smuggled into the country.
Yeah.
And they're basically slaves for, 5-10 years, whatever it takes to pay that off. And unfortunately, people... there's a legal way to enter the country. I think there should be an increase in legal immigration. They should beef that up, and it would incentivize people to come in the right way.
And that's something I've always heard about a lot, just listening to podcasts throughout the years, whether it be video games, tech, political, whatever. But the conversation, whenever it comes to legal immigration, they always say, God, it's so hard to get in here and to finally get to be a citizen. Not because of the tests or anything, but because the wait is forever.
Right.
And the process takes a long time.
You and I both know two guys that met somebody online in a particular country. They got married before they found out how long it took to get their wives into this country.
Oh, yeah.
And that's because they went about it the wrong way.
Oh.
And, usually, I don't know, it might be 6 to 18 months or something if somebody applies. But there's a quota on how many people actually can come in legally. And that should be increased. They should spend a little bit more money because it's important for disease and people to have family connections and have a source of income, to come into the country, so you're not on the social support of us paying people to survive once they get here.
Yeah, the that would be another thing I would like to see the administration like not go after, but kind of just re-examine.
Yeah, they may be
reevaluate it.
Yeah, they may be doing it behind the scenes.
Yeah.
They realize that's a component, but
I'm sure
it's not a talking point right now.
No, definitely not. It might be later, but I think it's definitely something that's been neglected in the last 5 years or even longer.
Right.
Because of the mass illegal immigration that we've seen.
Right. And it's important to vet people to make sure they haven't been involved in crimes in their country.
Yeah.
And, people don't change that quick just because they moved 1,000 miles north or south. So
yeah. And also security in the northern border is just as important, I would argue, because it's a border.
Right.
And China can still smuggle in.
Right. It's a roundabout way, people. It's a little bit harder.
Yeah. Well,
all the forests you got to go through to get here. Instead of desert where there's no forest,
exactly. But yeah, that's one of the things that we didn't even get to, but we can do next time. And I think next time I want to dive into a little bit more California and their history with California politics later on, or just California in general. Next time we have you on will be fun, or whatever we want to talk about, honestly. This has been fun. But yeah,
I appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for accepting the invite. We appreciate you. And I guess we'll end it there. I was going to go into fentanyl and stuff, but we don't have to. So we've been going long enough, I'd say. But yeah, thank you for your time, Dad. And
well, we can always tie fentanyl to California.
Yeah, exactly. We'll talk about that next time.
I think they coincide.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. But yeah, thank you so much for being on here and taking your time. And thank you folks out there for listening to this episode of the Snarp Fangle Podcast. And I guess we'll see you later. Thank you again. If you've made it to the end, then tell us you did down in the comments as well. And again, if you have any inquiries, send them on over to snarpfanglepod@gmail.com. And when you're hip-hopping across that border or hip-hopping into a factory to go work or wherever your job may be, don't forget to Snarp Fangle on. Bye-bye now.
Bye.